As you work through your projects in Revit, you will find many times where you wish to change the way various items display on screen and in your final output. There are various tools available in the software to make such changes, both globally across the entire project and in more specific and isolated ways. So each of the movies in this chapter will start with a much more global approach, and then with each movie we'll get progressively more specific and kind of drill down to very isolated and sort of special case overrides that we can apply. So I'm going to begin in this movie with a command called Object Styles, and this is sort of our global control panel for all of the graphical settings in the software. Now I'm looking at a section view right now, and what I want to do is zoom in over here in the joint condition between this exterior wall, the floor, and the ceiling, and kind of talk about one of the issues that might prompt you to go into Object Styles. So as you can see, the outline of the wall is a little bit bolder than the outline of either the floor slab or the ceiling plane. Now there's various ways we could adjust that, and it's sometimes tempting to sort of dive right in and select the floor and look for some way to modify it. But what I want you to do is resist the urge to immediately go in and start attacking a problem at a specific object. I want you to kind of back up and assess the problem first and think about, first of all, is it something that is more broad-reaching, and can I solve it in a more global way? And so what I mean by that is if I kind of zoom out here and we look around, what we actually see is that all the floors are kind of displaying that way. And then over here, we've got this little thing, and that's actually a small wall that's like a small little soffit wall here to close off the ceiling. And we start to see that this is a broader problem. Now, if we opened up another section, like perhaps this transverse section, and we zoom in, we see that the problem is not isolated to just a longitudinal section. It actually occurs everywhere. So this is a job for Object Styles. So let's talk about where we could get that command and what we can do with it. So I'm going to go over here to the Manage tab, and on the Settings panel, we have lots of different settings we can configure, and the Object Styles command is right here. Now this will display a multi-tab dialog with a list of all of the categories in Revit. Now it's organized into model objects, annotation objects, and so on. So we're going to focus on model objects because that's what we're seeing here in these various section views. And as you can see, if you scroll through this list here, all the various model categories are listed here. So there also is a filter list here at the top where you can actually deselect certain disciplines if you want to, and that will actually shorten the list and remove certain categories from the list. Now, we're going to focus on the architectural discipline because that's where we'll find the ceilings and the floors and the walls. So make sure that you keep at least architectural checked, but if you want to uncheck some of the other disciplines, you're welcome to do that. So let me go ahead and select ceilings here, and then let's talk about the settings that are actually in here. There's a line weight column, and that line weight column branches into two sub-columns, projection and cut. And what we can see is that ceilings has both the projection and the cut at the moment set to a pen weight 1. Now, if I click in either of those fields and I open up that little drop-down list, what you're going to see is there's 1 through 16. So they get progressively bolder as you go. So most of the time, you're going to see pen weights maybe 1 through 5. On occasion, you might see a 6 used for most of the settings. It would be rare to see something higher than a 6 or a 7, perhaps maybe on the borders of a title block, but that's about it. You would almost never see a 10 or 12 or 16, but they're available, okay? And those are just very, very fat lines. But if we kind of scroll through the list here, you can see that most of the projection settings are either 1 or 2, and then the cut settings, occasionally we'll see a 3. And if I continue to scroll down here and I locate walls, we could see that's at 3. Notice the topography is at 6. So when we cut through topography, and you can actually see it right here in the background, there's a really bold line there when we cut through the ground plane. So that's appropriate for topography because we really want our building to feel grounded. We want it to sit on something substantial. So putting a nice heavy pen weight there makes a certain amount of sense. But what I want to do in this case is I want to take a cue from the walls. We can see here in the background, the walls had a certain level of boldness when we zoomed in, and I want to match that with the floor and the ceiling. So what I'm going to do is come over here and locate the floor and ceiling categories. Here's the floors, and I'll just simply change this to a pen weight 3. I'm changing that in the cut column because we're in a section view and we're actually cutting through those elements. The projection is when you're seeing it off in the distance. So we're not actually seeing the floors or the ceilings off in the distance at the moment. And then let me find the ceiling again. and do the same thing there and change that to pen weight 3. Now, line color is fairly obvious, right? You could change the color of the edges of those objects if you want to. The line pattern is whether it's a solid line or a dashed line. And if you look here, you can see that there's lots of choices. We're going to leave those settings alone. Let's click OK. And let me zoom back in on this joint here. And as you can see now, the pen weights match for the ceiling, for the floor, and for the wall. And if I reopen that transverse section and zoom in, you're going to see that the same is true here. So when you apply a change at the object style level, it's actually going to apply across the entire project. So it's really important to get object styles to your liking first, because that is actually going to solve most of the problems because they apply globally. Now, often firms have office standards, so there's a pretty good chance that the object styles have already been configured in your firm template by some CAD or BIM manager that works in your firm. But if that's not the case, then you can spend a little time in there going through and kind of configuring them to your liking first before you consider doing any of the overrides that we're going to talk about in the next several movies.